What's going on, guys? Jason here in the basement. Welcome back. I'm just going to say it right off the bat. You don't need full frame. Full frame is overrated, and APS-C and smaller sensors are probably better for most people. For most people, I'd say. Not for everyone, but for most people. Now, I'm going to talk about my experience. I used Canon full frame for a short while. Had the 7D, the 5D Mark II. I had the 50, the nifty 50. I had the 85 millimeter 1.8. I had the 24 to 105 f4. I had the 28 millimeter 1.8. Probably a bunch of other lenses too, like the Tamron 70 to 300. So I had a collection of lenses, and they were cool. For me, it didn't work. And that was due to the weight versus quality output. So I'm a professional, but I'm a semi-professional. So I do have a day job, but I also do photography through my own business and do freelance work for other businesses. So I do a little bit of stuff here and there. So there's consistency, but yet there can be inconsistency. I don't make my full-time living from photography, but I make some money at it. I make additional income, as it comes. So having a full frame system, although the quality was good, because it was a large system and the lenses were large, I never wanted to take it with me anywhere else. So it really became a seldom used system, when the reason that I got into photography is because of the love of shooting. And I want to shoot a lot. So sometimes I just want to go shoot for this, go around with the family just in general places and, capture moments here and there. If I can take one good photo a day, that's all good with me, because I can print that photo. It can go into my, my digital archives, as well as I can print it and put it into my family photo albums. And then we can look at it years from now and enjoy it and, look at a moment in time and look back on what we used to look like, or what we were doing that was so fun, or a place that we haven't gone to in a while or may never see again. So that's how I like to shoot, and that's probably how I shoot most of the time, right, personally. So the natural step was to move down to smaller systems. And so that natural smaller system, being a Canon full frame shooter, was to get into Canon APS-C. So I moved to the Canon SL2. I had what was the other one? T6i. So I had those APS-C DSLR bodies. The problem with that is a lot of those lenses for the APS-C Canons weren't that much smaller. And because a lot of them were not purpose built for APS-C, they couldn't be smaller, because the mount for the full frame and the APS-C was actually the same size. So the physical circle of the APS-C Canon, the physical mount, was still the same size, even though the APS-C sensor in that camera was smaller than, say, the full frame. The circle of the lens mount was still the same size. So physically, you still had a certain amount of size that had to come with that APS-C. Even if it was APS-C purpose built, had to come with that mount. The size was still going to be there. And you could use the full frame lenses on the APS-C bodies, so that didn't really help. So although that was good, it didn't also let me shoot personally a whole lot, even though we did. The SL2 was a pretty small body for Canon DSLRs, the smallest I think that they had. And, we did take it around along with a Nikon, APS-C that we had. And so, we did take some shots, but still felt a little big. And these are first world problems, everybody, so bear with me. Complaints about things like these don't really qualify as complaints, but, this is all for entertainment and for information, right? So let's keep going. So I say, you know what? Let's move on once again. Canon moved into their M mount. They made an M mount, right? So they had the M50, the M6, the M100, all those cameras. I got into the M6. I got into the M5. I had a pair of those, and I had an M50. Those were the bodies that I primarily used, and those were cool. Those were actually mirrorless cameras. That was my first mirrorless interchangeable lens camera system, and they were lenses being built for that system. It was it was good quality. They had 24 megapixels. It wasn't pro stuff, but I didn't need it to be pro. And I actually used some of those cameras for pro work. So pro is a very it's a term that gets thrown around, but if you're making money from it, it's a pro camera. If your clients are not complaining, you did a professional job. That's how I look at it. So I actually used two M5s for a lot of things. Food photography. I actually did 2 weddings with it. So, it was good. And I think that even today, if you're a person who is an enthusiast beginner, you got a small budget, I would consider the M series, because right now, because it's kind of a defunct system or in limbo, you can get some good deals, and there have been some pretty good lenses that were built for it. I had the 22 millimeter f2. I love that lens. That was my favorite 35 millimeter equivalent. And then Sigma has their lens trio for the systems: the 16 1.4, the 30 1.4, and the 56 1.4. I had all those, and they were great. And so yeah, you can't really go wrong if you're just starting out. And then you can get some telephoto stuff, like they have the 55 to 250, I believe, and then you got the super zoom 18 to 150, which I took some great shots with that. So yeah, but ultimately, as a semi-pro, going back to that again, I didn't want to be invested in a system that was not going to be supported, and that's what it felt like, because new lenses were coming out from third parties and even other system lenses that were coming out that I thought were very interesting, but yet Canon didn't have development for the M series. So ultimately the lenses I had were pretty complete. I didn't really need much more. I just felt like, well, if they're not going to support it and make even better bodies for those lenses in the future to really capitalize on that mirrorless, craze going on at the time, because they didn't really have the R series, I said, you know what, I'm going to get out. I'm going to move on from the M, and I eventually got into Fuji, because I had an X-T1 along with those M series cameras, and I kind of used that as like my fun camera. I adapted some of my Canon lenses actually to the Fuji X-T1 using like speed boosters and things like that, but it didn't really work out. And so I just fully moved on to Fuji. X-T1, XH1 was my 1 and 2, 1 A and B bodies. And I felt like that's where Fuji shined there for me, because they purpose built their lenses for APS-C, because they don't have any full frame cameras. So they're all about APS-C, and all their lenses are made to be of the highest quality for their system. And you had small lens options. I'm using one right now, the 16 2.8. I have all the other f2 lenses, and I'm very happy with the size to quality performance ratio. And then they have professional bodies. They have weather sealed bodies that you can feel confident in using in a professional environment with dual car slots and things like that. XT2, and I have the X Pro 2. I had the XH1 at one point, and you feel confident that that system is going to be around, it's supported, people love it, and they're also of the right size ratio for me to bring around when I'm not shooting professionally. So when I'm shooting personally, I can still bring out the 27 millimeter 2.8, and shoot that pancake lens on my XE3 or the XS10 and feel like I'm shooting personally, but I got a high enough quality camera that if I do take a shot that I really like, that I can get the highest quality from it and print and do good prints and use it for maybe stock photography, things like that. So I just don't ever really feel like I would ever go back to a full frame system. I just really don't feel like for me that there was ever truly a difference. Now I know somebody's out there who's an uber professional who's gonna say, "Oh no, there's a clear difference between APS-C and full frame," and I get it. You got the gathering of light and things like that. But in my experience, when all things are equal, no one really knows the difference. It's I think to me, I think the sweet spot of APS-C and even Micro Four Thirds. Now that I'm getting into it, I'm starting to be convinced that as long as you are of a good quality photographer and you know what you're doing, you know how to get that full frame. I'm not gonna say look, but you know how to get the depth of field you need. You know how whether that is deep depth of field or shallow depth of field. In knowing what conditions you're shooting in, you know how to compensate for those conditions. You will know you can get the same results no matter what system you're using. If you want a shallow depth of field portrait, you know what you have to do. You know distance from the background. You need a shallow, depth of field using a fast lens, compression. Like you know the aspects of what you need. If you're outdoors, you know you got enough light to compensate no matter what sensor size, and you can get the job done. So I'm never gonna go full frame, and that's the end of it. Peace, y'all. Have a good one.